So thank you so much, Shodo, for coming to visit with us today.
Thank you, Will. It's an honor to be asked to talk. I'm grateful that you merely asked me to talk about my experience and not to try to explain the text. So I'm actually going to start by talking something about how it came to be that I was the editor. I was newly arrived at Sanshinji in southern Indiana. There were, I think, 4 of us who were like main students. The others were student priests. I was not yet ordained, but we kind of did things together. And one day our teacher gathered us together and handed us things to edit. Now, I was in love with the Genjo koan, and if I thought I had time to do editing, I would have volunteered for that one, but I hung back thinking I could avoid the whole thing. This was not true. And actually, looking back, I can't understand why I thought I didn't have time. But that's what I thought anyway. And so at the last one, he said, okay, you can do Sansuikyo. And then he said, it's about deep ecology. And I went, okay. And I kind of put it on my very slow to-do list. And I had a Word document that was a transcription by actually Sarah Hunsaker, who was somebody that I knew when I was at Green Gulch. Anyway, so I would look at this and be overwhelmed. And then I would be overwhelmed again. My very first reaction to the Mountains and Waters Sutra was when I bought my first Zen book, which was called Moon and a Dewdrop, and there it was. I went, Blue Mountains Walking gives birth to a mountain child. This is crazy. So anyway, so there I was, and he says it's deep ecology, and I had never been comfortable with the thing. So that's how we start. I would go through it, and there was an easy part, which was smoothing out the language, grammar, taking things out, little corrections. And that's what I felt entitled to do or authorized to do. I really didn't want to challenge his voice or to damage his voice in the writing. And I sort of didn't think I should do anything very big. As I went through his writing, there were things that were magnificent and there were things that were totally mystifying. So there we go. And the time when I actually had lots of time to work with it was the year I spent in Anchorage with Anchorage Zen Community. But unfortunately, Okamura Roshi was very busy working on a different text, and so I couldn't consult with him very much. So I wound up working with it later on when I was busy again. Somewhere in the process, he handed it over to a professional editor, Molly Whitehouse, who is also a student of his and now a Dharma heir. And she just went at it, chopped it up, moved things around. And suddenly I saw that it was possible to actually mess with it. So I felt emboldened and empowered. And then he became available. And so when I got stuck with something, I could ask him a question. And sometimes he would rewrite a whole section. And sometimes he would just take things out. There was a piece where he talks about the time when he was living at San Francisco Zen Center and working at Shodo Shu, and which was located in the old Japanese temple. And he said, referred to going back and forth like a bat, only he said bat because he has an accent. And, I probably asked him 3 times what that sentence was and never remembered it. And finally he took it out, which is too bad, because his use of imagery is a wonderful thing, but there it is. So a little bit about the structure of it. He didn't do his own translation. He worked with Carl Bielefeld's translation, and Carl's comments on this process are in an appendix at the end, and I enjoyed them very much. But Carl divided it into 5 sections. There's an introduction, a section on mountains, a section on waters, a section on mountains and waters, and then a closing, which is pretty short, a summary sort of thing. And so that gave me a structure. I had to make chapters and subtitles, and I had to decide what their titles were. At first, I just made these divisions to help myself work with them. And then I realized that I was going to put titles on these things, and they were actually going to go into the book, and they were going to influence how people read and how they understood what was happening. And I became terrified. But there was nothing to do but go forward. And again, the wonderful thing that he looked at everything, and so he could say no to something. When Katagiri Roshi wrote his books, he did not look at things. And so his students and his editors were just totally stuck. And they've spoken about how frightening that was. And then, of course, he died. And so there was no recourse. But I had a very, very helpful teacher. So let's see. And at the end of the whole thing, including conversations with wisdom and conversations with Okamura Roshi and so forth, I had to write a preface. Now, editors write prefaces in different ways. A lot of them write for 10 pages, and they outline the entire thing, and they're very scholarly. And I just wasn't up for it. My teacher is very scholarly. I am not. And so I asked and received permission to just write some things about what I felt. And what I want to do here is read that preface and then add some comments to it. Because as I went back to the book, I finished Rohatsu Sesshin on Thursday, and yesterday basically was dedicated to preparing this talk. So on first hearing the titles Mountains and Waters Sutra, I found my heart opening. The truth is written in the mountains, the rivers, and the whole earth. This is what I have known all my life. So there's the first thing. When he says, or it's when the commentators say, it's not a sutra about mountains and waters. It's that mountains and waters are themselves the sutra, the thread, the teaching. That something in me recognizes that. I spent my childhood, fortunately, on an acre with some extra wild spaces, and I spent a lot of time outdoors, wandering in the woods, in the fields, picking blackberries, picking raspberries, finding the iris one spring, which are just miraculous. and then going back year after year, looking for them. And after a few years, I learned when they came out, which was sometime in May, and I remembered where they were. But I also remember several springs, sometime between 7 and 10 years old, probably, of just going out there looking for those magical flowers. The sun, the scratches from the blackberry bushes, a row of trees, I think they were spruce trees that were out past the blackberry field, and you could sit under them, and it was a peaceful place. And I think we would play house there, but that wasn't really the point. The point was, what a wonderful place. Those beings, and the iris, the wild iris, the ones that I found first were tame iris, the big ones with fragrance. But then the wild iris, blue flags, they're called. Going down to the creek and going down to Lake Erie and the beach. And my entire childhood and adolescence are full of the gifts of, we will say, mountains and waters of the natural world, speaking Dharma. Dogen has a poem. He writes originally about a poem someone else's. The Sound of the Mountains are his. Okay. Whose poem is it? Anyway, so Dogen's poem is the one that struck me. The colors of the mountain peak, echoes of the valley stream, all of them as they are nothing other than Shakyamuni's voice and appearance. So this is about the natural world. And it was a little hard for me to accept that Dogen's writing was not actually about the natural world. As Okamura Roshi says, he wrote this when he lived in Kyoto. Kyoto is a very beautiful city, but it's not mountains. Mount Hiei is there to the north. But in Kyoto itself, it's relatively flat. I was trying to remember, I was there for a week once, and I don't remember going up and down hills much. It's very beautiful. And so when Dogen wrote this, he was writing metaphorically the mountains as a symbol of interdependent origination, Indra's net, and the waters as thusness, or just the way things are. There's a place in the text where he talks about a person in the mountains. When you're inside the mountains, you can't see the mountains. You can't see what's going on when you're in the middle of it. And I think there's a little controversy about that. So I'm not going to take a stand on that, but on the one hand, you can't see it because you're in the middle of it. We can't see how interdependent origination works because we're just here in the middle of it. We're being created by all those other things, and everything is moving around us. And I think there's a way in which we do see. And I can't reproduce that right now. But I remember being struck by it because there's a great deal said about how we can't see it as long as we're in the middle of it. And then there's this little, well, yeah, but we do see things. Oh, I was reading my comments. Oh, so on attempting to read it, I became quite confused. Blue Mountains Walk. It seems like the word for blue and the word for green are the same word. So sometimes it's Green Mountains and sometimes it's Blue Mountains. Dogen's poetic writing did not yield to me. Only by working with this commentary did I begin to enter the profound and intimate teaching Dogen offers. Through Mountains and Waters, he discusses everything in the teaching and in our whole life of practice. This text, which is, I think it's thought of as difficult, it covers everything. And a few things that are strange, but I'll come back to that. So then I have my favorite quotations. We must bring to realization the road on which the self encounters the self. I almost can't say anything about that. There's a road. My name means right path. There is a road on which we meet ourselves and manifest ourselves. And of course, there's this individual little self, the one that appears moment by moment and is created moment by moment. And it's encountering the self of the whole universe, the self of interdependent origination, the self of the forests and also of the deaths. One of the things that Okamura Roshi pointed out about these mountains is that they're not just beautiful. For instance, there's ways when creatures kill each other that they cause each other a great deal of pain. Just as there are ways when humans relate to each other, we cause each other a great deal of pain. Not even to mention the pain and suffering that we cause to other beings, to not human beings. These words should be engraved on skin, flesh, bones, and marrow, engraved on the interior and exterior of body and mind, engraved on emptiness and on form. They are engraved on trees and rocks, engraved on fields and villages. And then I wanted to read some more of the place where that is. I think my favorite part of the text was the last part, where he talks about mountains and waters together. And so he says, these words mean the expression of the mountains. Mountains are always peacefully abiding and walking and flowing. These are their expressions. Resting within the Dharma position at each moment, and yet constantly walking, these virtues should be inscribed on our skin, flesh, bones, and marrow, our entire being. We should embody the mountains and practice as the mountains. And then he says the one phrase means body and mind. Exterior means the environment. Interior means our own body and mind as karma appears in it. And so we engrave these words: constantly in peace and constantly walking both inside and outside. Care for ourselves and our circumstances and keep the whole, interior and exterior as one thing, healthy. Engraved on emptiness and on form means to see both sides as one. In the form is emptiness, and emptiness is form expression. There it is. Once, well, I went to a conference in Hong Kong, and after the conference, I took a walk up. It was referred to as the peak. And a woman who lived there led me and another woman up the walk, and she took us to a place where there were actually images engraved on the hillside. It was Amida Buddha, and people would come up there and make offerings. And so we sat there for quite a while, and we made bows, and we took pictures, and other people came up to do honor to it also. So it was engraved on rocks. It seemed to be cement. And so that's the image that comes up when I hear engraved on rocks. I wouldn't carve into a tree, but the words are engraved in trees without our taking knife to them. Oh, there's this little story, the origin of engraved on trees and rocks, about Sesan Doji, snow mountain boy living in the Himalayas, who met a monster reciting the first two lines of a verse. Shogyo Mujo Zesho Mepo. Of course, he wasn't reciting them in Japanese. All beings are impermanent. These are the beings of arising and perishing. And the boy thought it was beautiful, but it was only half of it. And he said to the monster, please recite the second half. And the monster said, I'm too hungry. And Sesan said, after you chant the rest of the verse, you can eat me. Please recite the second half of the verse. And the monster recited, arising and perishing cease. Calm extinction is nirvana. Arising and perishing, and then they come to peace. So Snow Mountain Boy, wrote it on the trees and stones to share it with all beings. Then he jumped off of a large rock to offer his body. But the monster was actually Indra. So Indra caught him, and he got to live and to continue practicing. And then Okamura Roshi says, does not mean literally inscribed on trees and rocks. Trees, rocks, and everything else are the reality of both arising and perishing, and the cessation of arising and perishing. The true reality of all beings is engraved on each and everything. When we see anything in nature with the Dharma eye, we see the reality of all beings everywhere. And then he says, Sawaki Roshi, who had an extremely different childhood and adolescence, heard a Buddhist priest talk about this story, and this inspired him to seek the Dharma and to become a Buddhist monk. And from somewhere else, fields and villages, human activity in cities, villages, fields, and so on also express the Dharma of peacefully dwelling and yet constantly moving. So when I was young, I loved nature and I did not like humans. And I'm sure that says something about my personality and my childhood and all that stuff. But it took me a long time to be able to see the Dharma, see the radiance and the beauty and the intensity and the full of lifeness of everything, of humans, even difficult humans. Well, it's still hard to see it in difficult humans. I can have that in my mind. I know that even difficult humans have it. So, but that the Dharma is everywhere, and that everywhere is full of joy and beauty. And now we have, another piece that I loved. I'll just go to it where it is in the text. Although we say that mountains belong to the country, actually they belong to those who love them. So love is not a word we use a lot in Zen. And this particular word is a word that's usually used for, say, attachment and what we shouldn't do. But it means, okay, that common Chinese word also has a positive meaning to love and take care of things. And that's the way that Dogen is using the word here. And when they translate the Bible, they use ai for God's love. So, and it's funny, he says, we think that mountains belong to the country. Well, that never occurred to me. I think that mountains belong to themselves. But it's true that that's a common way of thinking of things. They belong to their property owners, or they belong to a nation, or somehow they belong to humans. And Dogen says they belong to people who love them. And then he says for practitioners, it's not only mountains, but the whole world, this reality, our entire lives, including self and environment. All of this belongs to us, those who love it, who practice. So then he says, when the mountains love their owners, and Okamura Roshi says, owners. So this word also means host, as in host and guest. So when you have a master living in a monastery, he says, or a practitioner living in a hermitage, as we know is some tradition, there's the host, and the training monks are guests in the monastery. And if there's one person in a hermitage, anybody who comes to study with them is a guest. And so it's never about owning. It's about loving, and it's about living with it. It's about belonging to it. The understanding, there's an understanding of how we participate in the mountains and in the natural world, that's come forth more since this book was written. It's like the Native American and many other indigenous understandings. Indigenous people who are living close to the earth, they're part of the earth, and they don't think about owning it. They are in relationship with it. And so the people who love the mountains, and the mountains who love the people who live in them and take care of them and love them, well, then the wise and virtuous inevitably enter the mountains. And then he says, because the reality of life loves us, we inevitably are being drawn into the mountains. We are drawn into the reality of life, where mountain lovers live as our teachers. And when sages and wise men wise people, live in the mountains. Because the mountains belong to them, the trees and rocks flourish and abound, and the birds and beasts take on a supernatural excellence. So it's like they live in the mountains and they belong to the mountains. And the mountains, this is intimate relationship. And it's easy to think about this relationship, or particularly to fantasize about this relationship of living in a mountain with great intimacy. And then we think, oh, living in Indra's net, living in the way all things are with great intimacy. And mountain lovers live as our teachers. And trees and rocks flourish, birds and beasts take on a supernatural excellence. It's like the phrase in Genjo Koan, trees, rocks, piles and pebbles all emit a bright and shining joy and preach the profound and incomprehensible Dharma. So he suggests spiritual rather than supernatural. And I don't have the kanji, or I would have loved to look it up. But then he says the mountains start to radiate a spiritual light. And the beauty of this light attracts more way seekers. And so he's talking about a person and environment working together, influencing and supporting each other. And that this is exactly the same as Jiju Zamai, self-receiving and self-employing samadhi. Each person's zazen influences everything in the world. Everything reveals its own original realization. And the realization of all beings influences the person in zazen. The self and myriad dharmas work together without separation between perception and namarupa, or objects. There is no action of contact. The contact is what creates samsara, or unsatisfactoriness. And we actually become one with. It's sort of that dance of, well, the dance of Indra's net, where on the one hand we're one, and on the other hand, we're all reflecting each other. We're all the knots on the net, reflecting each other, moving with each other, being moved by each other. This incredible intimacy. And I'm thinking, oh, this is why he told me, why he recommended me working with this text, because this is the depth of my understanding. And as I talk today, I think, oh, maybe editing this text is why this is my understanding. Maybe this was his gift, was to give me what I thought I had. Mountains belong to those who love them. So now, oh, okay. And then I said some things about Okamura Roshi. I said, it was his kindness that attracted me to study with Shohaku Okamura. Yet over the years, the results of his scholarship have seeped into my bones. His translations and commentaries are completely trustworthy. And I can say that after years of listening to his lectures and of going back to the dictionaries myself as he goes back to the language and explains the meaning of the Japanese words. And it's like, oh, okay. And I love that way of studying. It's like, oh, what did they really say here? He's careful with words and their meaning. And he knows the context in which Dogen and other ancients spoke. And he's not fooled by the glamour that surrounds so many ancestors. I couldn't tell you how many times he's read something and said, I think this is not true. And so, because I know his way of translating and studying, I feel safe with his work. And over the years, as he came to America, well, he had already taught in English, but he came to America and was forced to give a lecture every week and to give lectures at Sesshin once a month. And he says, hell is lecturing in English. He might even say it somewhere in this book, but he certainly has said that. And his English is very, very good. And when he doesn't know something, he uses it and asks a question, hey, what does this mean? You know, but he also uses the dictionary a lot. Let me see. What else do I want to say? There's a little piece in the introduction where he's talking. Well, I want to read it. Dogen writes, when we are truly practicing, the sounds and the colors of the valley streams, the colors and the sounds of the mountains, all unbegrudgingly expound their 84,000 verses. That's from Keisei Sanshoku, which I think is valley streams. This means the sounds of valley streams and the color of mountains do not hide the Dharma, the teaching, the truth, or the reality of all beings. It's always revealed. Nothing is hidden. What's important is the condition of the person. Are we ready to listen to what the valley stream is really saying to us? Are we ready to see the Buddha's body through the form of mountains? I know that when I began to practice in 1983, I would listen. Well, I would listen to a whole hour's lecture by Katagiri Roshi and try to understand one sentence. So there's that. But then a few years in, I started thinking I understood some things. And then I finally sat along Sesshin, and about halfway through, I started to actually hear what he was saying and to recognize how completely I had not understood. And I became very excited because it's like, oh, here is a whole new territory. And so I became interested in dropping my ideas and listening to the new ideas. That, of course, were not new, but they were new to me because I hadn't been able to hear them. He says, when the self does not cling to fame, profit, body, and mind, valleys and mountains as well do not withhold their verses in a similar way. We make a fence between ourselves and all other things. We cling to them as our personal possession. When we can get something good, we want to take it into my territory and keep it. This is a basic problem caused by the three poisons: greed, anger or hatred, and ignorance. If we are free from these, we can see the fence is only in our mind. In reality, we are not separated from other things. If we are free from this separation, then not only mountains and rivers, but each and everything in the world is always expounding Buddha's teaching. This is the reality of impermanence, egolessness, and interdependent origination. So to say when we're free from the three poisons is a kind of a big thing. But, you know, so I'm in a fortunate state right now because I just had 7 days of sitting. and the weight lifts a little bit. You know, the weight of those thoughts and opinions and desires and things. You sit in company, in good company for a while, and the load is a little lighter, and sometimes there's a little opening, and we can hear the voices of the mountains and the voices of the truck drivers and the voices of the ice and of the pain in our knee and the person who's complaining at us. That all these things can open. Ooh, okay. One more thing. Okamura says, I found out who I am by studying with my teacher. And he says, that's transmission. I didn't actually receive anything, but I found that I'm one with all beings. That's what he taught by his way of life. The human convention that we are all different and independent is a very strange thing. We are educated in that convention. As a result, we must search to find what has been true from the very beginning, before we have questions, even before we learn that we are different and independent. Even though everything has its own uniqueness, these things cannot exist without relations with others. We are nothing other than the relation of billions of things. Somehow we have to find this truth. This is a process of study and practice. Mountains see mountains and waters see. That feels, I'm ready to stop and take a breath and invite questions and comments. Thank you so much thank you for asking me this. I did not know this would happen. It's a rediscovery.